Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seafood Matters. Thank you for listening again. Joining me today is Hans Polet, Scientific Director at ILVO, the Belgium Research Institute for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Welcome, Hans. Thanks for joining me today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We could start by asking you about the EU fisheries management, any of the frustrations or burdens. What is good about the EU Common Fisheries Policy?
Well, I've always been a fan of the EU and of the Common Fisheries Policy. I've been doing this job for 35 years and I've seen a lot of benefits. I think it's thanks to the Common Fisheries Policy that we still have enough fish in the sea. It mainly helped bring, let's say, the capacity of the fishing fleet in balance with the productivity of fish stocks. And I think some 10 years ago, we kind of reached that. And I was very positive and optimistic about the future back then. But somewhere along the road, I lost my faith, being confronted, with, first of all, a lot of frustration in the fishing industry. And as I have plenty contacts, I've been at sea a lot, I really wanted to have a deeper look into that issue. I'm not a fisheries manager. I'm not a fisheries biologist. I'm a fishing gear technologist. So from a very technical side of the thing, I've been studying fisheries. A bit ignorant about management and stock assessment. But then I saw things going wrong. I saw a lot of complaints of parties involved, and I started to having a deeper look into stock assessment and fisheries management. And I kind of saw that, let's say, at all levels of the whole fisheries system, I see flaws, I see problems. Big ones, small ones, and each one on its own probably not dramatic. But I think if you add it all up, bring it all together, I think we have a system that's, in desperate need of innovation, let's say. Yeah.
Wow. Such dramatic and desperate need.
Desperate? Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, it just took the way you said that, as if you could see it was pretty important that it did get.
Yeah, actually, coincidentally, this morning we had our meeting with the fishing industry where we propose the advices, the scientific advices that have been made in ICES for the fish stocks, their fish. And it's negativity all around. They don't agree with the results. They are afraid of the future. They kind of say or predict that they will be able to maybe fish for another few years, but it's going to an end. They're very pessimistic for different reasons. First of all, in the light of what we discussed today, the accuracy of the determination of the TACs, so the total allowable catches, the quota. In a number of cases they agree, but in many cases they completely disagree with the advice. And they have a lot of difficulties coping with, let's say, the complexity of the Common Fisheries Policy, of what European managers are imposing on the system. They have a huge amount of administrative tasks, too much, and many of them, they don't see why they have to do it, what's the added value. And they suffer from, let's say, the top-down micromanagement and a very strong focus on control and enforcement. So within the whole system, there's pressure on the fishing industry. And then they have to cope with nature protection. They have to cope with wind farms coming in and taking fishing grounds. They have to cope with closed areas or areas with restrictions. They have to cope with not to underestimate the consequences of climate change. And then climate change kind of messes up the whole stock assessment, scientific fisheries advice. They have to cope with these things. They have to cope with a landing obligation that gives them choke species, which makes them stop fishing often, or I wouldn't say often, but in some cases with the wrong quota. So the quota are underestimated, so they have to stop fishing while there's still that kind of fish in the sea. So all these things together make that, well, already quite a few fishing vessels have left the industry. And they say, well, many more will follow if we don't change the system.
It sounds, the way you talk there, Hans, it sounds like very similar to what we very often find in the UK, that you get fisheries scientists and the civil servants, and they don't listen to fishermen, and they know better.
Yeah, they see the daily reality, and that's what, well, and mainly I think managers in Brussels are missing, but also quite a few scientists. I don't want to criticize these people. I mean, they are my colleagues, and I'm part of it, and they are hardworking people, and very clever. But often we have, let's say, the modelers who do the computer work in simulating the ecosystem and fish stocks. These people are quite detached from reality as well. There's the scientists who go at sea. They have a good feeling, but that's often not the scientists who do the actual scientific work, the stock assessment. So there's a difference between data collection and stock assessment. So the further you are up the chain of the, let's say, the scientific system, the further you are from the reality. And that's something that we are lacking in science. We really should get that feel again with reality. And for that, you need a good and intense contact with the fishing industry. That's what's often missing. I mean, I think in Belgium, we're doing it, to be not humble for once, but I think we're doing a terrific job. We have been working together intensely with the fishing industry for the last 15 years. And the nice thing about that is that we have access to all their information, all their data. So we actually have a direct link to all the instruments on board, also the scale. They also allow cameras on board, and we have real-time accumulation of this data in our databases. So every hour we get this information. So just because of the good relationship we have built, there is trust, there is cooperation, and we have access to all the data we need. Now, of course, in order to actually get the real value of this data out of there, we cannot do it in the present management system. We have to change the system, but we can come back to that later. But to come back to your question, it's actually the fishers who see the reality, who are confronted with the reality, and also confronted with the scientific advice. And often these two don't match. And so what to do then? And that's the one of the puzzles we are facing now.
You know, it takes my mind, Hans, to two conversations I've had in previous podcasts, one more recent. And in fact, I'm just wondering if you maybe would know the guy. He was many years with the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen, and he was involved with gear. Jack Robertson.
Oh, yes, I remember him very well. I mean, he was active quite long before I became a scientist, but I have seen a lot of his underwater footage, because
And
I think he was a diver now, taking
That's right. Correct.
filming fishing.
Yeah, and his what he classes as his baby was the square mesh, cod ends and panel. And the point I put, Hans, and be interesting just to put the same to you. It was I was having a conversation with a fisheries scientist in Iceland, Jon Christensen, his name, and he's well retired. I mean, he's in his 80s now. The point he made, which Jack pretty much agreed with, be interesting to get your view. He says when they were doing the job, right, all they did was they would go out on trawlers and do all their work, their assessments and surveys, and that. It would all be done out on trawlers with fishermen. And then they decided they were going to get their own vessels. And as the way he put it, which is not being serious, but he says, "Oh, we don't want to go out on dirty, smelly trawlers. We'll have our own nice new ships." And he reckons that was pretty much one of the biggest mistakes they ever made in Iceland, because he says they took fishermen and scientists apart.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I can even say that we are heading in the other direction again. We're moving away from research vessels to do this kind of service, and we are starting to do them again on commercial vessels. First of all, indeed, as you say, the contact between the fishers and the scientists. Scientists have to understand what fishers are facing, the problems they are facing at sea. And at the other hand, it's very interesting as fishers start to understand the whole stock assessment system and how this prediction of the fish stocks, how this works. So that they come to some mutual understanding and they find some common ground, and that's very important for cooperation. And then, well, I have a bit of a problem with surveys on research vessels. I mean, I won't talk for the other countries, but for Belgium, we have a research vessel of 70 meters long, 3,800 tons, towing a beam trawl of 4 meter and a beam trawl of 8 meter. I mean, that's the kind of trawl that is towed by a 24-meter beam trawler with a tonnage of 70 tons. I mean, so you have a fishing gear that is towed by a vessel that is 50 times the tonnage compared to the fishing vessel. I have a problem with that. I mean, if the weather is, if the sea is flat, there's probably not so much of an issue. But as soon as that vessel starts moving, that fishing gear is a toy. Just it's stone off the ground. It's not efficient anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage of scientists like me, who have been at sea a lot, who know how fishing gears work. That's thanks also to Jack Robertson, who took the video footage of these gears so you can actually see how it operates, how it moves on the sea floor. If you don't know that, you have no idea what's going on. And then you're on your research vessel and you follow the scientific procedure and you think you are doing the right thing. And they're honest people. I don't doubt them. But I doubt their practical knowledge. And you actually need fishers to do something like that properly. If you go on board of a fishing vessel to do this kind of service, then you have the right fishing vessel with the right fishing gear and the right expertise on board to make the gear work. I mean, if you go on board of a beam trawler, you have two trawls. The skipper, each hole looks in detail at the difference in the catch of the two gears, because he knows that while you are fishing, things change in the gear, a little damage or so, and the catching efficiency can suddenly go down. So every hole they adjust the fishing gear if it's needed, and they do that with their practical knowledge, which most scientists don't have. So this cooperation is essential. Yeah,
that's really interesting, and it's what fascinates me. Well, not so much fascinates me, but it's a telling point, Hans, is listening to you say that every person involved in this, who I rate and I know is doing good things, they all say the same, just exactly the same as you're saying. So that's really interesting. And it's credit to Belgium if you're going. I don't think that's when you doing that again with the fishers. That's not a backward step. I see that, although it's maybe doing what they did before, but it's not, and it's forward. It's a forward step.
Definitely. And the thing is, if you start this cooperation with the fishing fleet, you can actually change the system. For example, for the survey, I think it's a very interesting example. I talked to you about it. The technical side of things. There's also the temporal side of things. The surveys, they usually go on in the month of September, and they do that every year, and that's a good thing. I mean, it gives a time series, and you can see through time how the fish evolves. But you're limited to the month of September. Now, we also know that with climate change, that seasons move. I mean, fish behavior follows the weather and the temperature in the sea and so on. And due to climate change, there's a shift. So things that were happening in September in the past, maybe now are happening in October or in August. These things change. So what are you actually measuring with your survey in September? Are you measuring the same thing as 10 years ago? Can you use that time series with confidence? I have doubts. What I'm advocating for is that you use the fishing fleet to do your surveys and allow the fishers or work together with the scientists to have kind of this young fish survey, because that's what these surveys are after. They fish with fishing gear with small meshes to catch the young fish. So your young fish survey, you should spread it over the whole year. And if you use the fishing fleet to do that, and you give kind of assignments to the different vessels to go fish there with small mesh and there, spread over the year, you get that picture of the young fish over a wide area throughout time. So you can actually follow up how fish move geographically, how it changes in time, how quickly they grow, what is the mortality rate. All this information you get thanks to spreading the surveys over a wide area and throughout the year. And I'm really advocating for that. I think this would be a big step forward, especially because with climate change, you have these sudden changes or these huge changes that you don't pick up with the regular surveys. Or not quickly enough. So if you can do that quickly, as a manager, you can react quickly. As a fisher, you can react quickly. You also have a better idea about the geographical distribution of the young fish. I mean, you want to save the young fish. If you don't know where they are, that's not easy when you plan your fishery as a fisher. But if you have these maps, let's say kind of a heat maps of distribution maps of small fish, then and you know where they are and how they move, and you know where the commercial fish is that you are targeting, well, you can plan your fishery to save the young fish and maximize the catch of your marketable fish. So there's a lot of value in this cooperation and in better data collection.
Yeah. Correct me if what I'm a little bit puzzled with. When you say what you're doing in Belgium, can you do that? And I thought it would have to be EU policy.
No, we're not allowed to do that. No, we are not doing this yet. This is what we are suggesting.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Excellent.
We have this. Yeah, we have this alternative approach that we would like to have. We would like to, for example, we would like to do that in the North Sea, and we would really love to have the British there. I miss my old friends since the Brexit, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense to manage an area like the North Sea with the same rules, with the same scientific approach, with the same cooperation together. If we are politically separated, I mean, the fish don't have borders, so let's cooperate there. But the thing is, now we are not allowed to do that yet. So these surveys on board, well, yes, we can do surveys on board of commercial vessels, but that's a much different approach. You have to really plan. And so we are still stuck with the surveys in September. We do that mostly on board of commercial vessels now. And we have to have a special permission to do that. Now, as long as we stay in Belgian waters, that's not so difficult. But our survey goes beyond that, British and Dutch waters and so. So we need a special permission, and it often takes us 6 months to get that permission. So, I mean, there's an administrative burden there as well. So we should get rid of all this.
Yeah. When you said that, when you made the point about borders, fish don't know borders. I think is that the term you used?
Yes, I think so. Yes, the fish don't know borders. Yeah.
I would take that a stage further, Hans, and say fisheries scientists and people like yourselves don't have borders. Fishers don't have borders. It's just when you take politicians in, that's when the problems start.
Yeah. But I think we're stuck with that system.
And what would you say has gone wrong with the EU CFP, the Common Fisheries Policy?
Well, I think when you have a system, any system to manage something, and you see some flaws and you want to improve, well, you add a layer of additional rules, and then a few years later, there's again um, uh, people look at the quality of the system and they see some flaws again. And so every so many years, there's a layer of regulations and administrations added to the system, which more and more makes it complicated. That's the same with most of the management systems in our society. And that's what politics do. Politics identify a problem and they add a number of laws and regulations to solve it. But if you keep on doing that, after a while, your system becomes so complex that it's just not workable anymore. And this is what we have seen in the Common Fisheries Policy. There's very few people who actually understand the whole system. Ask an inspector when he goes at sea if he knows all the technical measures and can actually see in the fishing gear if all these things are correctly rigged or not. I think they know the main things, but they don't know everything. For a number of regulations, they don't know exactly if it goes about selective panels, square mesh panels, for example, how exactly it must be fixed in a gear. It's not easy, and to control that is not easy. So it's all becoming too complex. And the Common Fisheries Policy has always stimulated innovation in science, in fisheries. I'm really grateful for that. But the one thing they forgot is to innovate themselves. So we have an old-fashioned system.
Yeah.
Same with fisheries science. I think we still have, of course, it has improved over the years. It has become more efficient, but the basic system is still the Beverton and Holt stock assessment idea from behind just after the Second World War. We're still working with the same ideas. We have to fundamentally reform and not just adjust. But that's what we're doing. We're adjusting a little bit and fixing this a little bit. And in the end, well, it's more or less acceptable for everybody, but it doesn't really work.
And would you say fishers, our scientists, are happy with the management system?
I have the impression that amongst scientists, they have just learned to live with the system and have kind of accepted it and try to cope with it. And especially the younger people, I mean, they come into that system and this is what it is and this is what they have to work with. I mean, I have seen the system evolving over 35 years. I have seen strengths and weaknesses coming back, and I know where the system is flawed. But most scientists just cope with it. And one other thing, well, I think the most important thing is that most scientists don't believe that we can fundamentally reform the system. They just say, well, that's a mission impossible. Let's not even try that. Don't put energy in that. Won't work. We will try to fiddle around and try to cope with it. That's the attitude.
And when you say the flaws in that, do you feel that the Common Fisheries Policy could be built around a lack of proper information?
A lack of proper information? Well, no, I think you need decent information to manage this, of course, yeah. Well, I think.
No, but do you think it's built on, although they didn't realize that?
Can you rephrase your question? I don't think I understood it.
Sorry. I'm just asking what, with fisheries, scientific fisheries advice, is it if the Common Fisheries Policy is built around a lack of information?
Yes, I think so. A lack of knowledge of the reality at sea. I really think that's the thing, because you have a management system in the EU that's focused on control and enforcement. So by this definition, it's based on distrust between the managers and the fishers. And the consequence is that the fishers will not release all information they have. They will often even release information that is just not true. I mean, if you have regulations that are too complex to follow, well, then fishers will find a way around it. and will withhold information that is reliable and will spread information that is just wrong. As a consequence, the perception of the fisheries, of managers, and often scientists as well, is not correct, does not reflect the reality at sea. So if you look at all the different data sources that we use as scientists, well, each of these data sources have an issue. Logbook data. Logbook data. We have one data entry in 24 hours. That's to start with low resolution. It's so-called digitized, but it's still manually put in. So it's open to errors. It's open to fraud. And we know there is fraud. So logbook data are, I think, not very reliable. It's not as, the scientific system will not crash or be completely wrong because of the logbook data. But if you add the other uncertainties to it, I think you really get to have a problem. For example, discards. For stock assessment, we have to know how much fish die, so we also should know how much of the small fish is caught and thrown back overboard. We send observers at sea to do that, and we have a coverage of about 1%. Now, every fisher who goes at sea knows that variability of fish catches is very high. You fish at one side of the sandbank, and you get this type of catch, and you move 100 meters to the other side of the sandbank, and you get a completely different catch composition. Fish catches are very, very variable. So you need a really high sampling percentage to get reliable data. If you only have 1%, well, I have doubts. I'm only a simple fishing gear technologist, but if you know how fish catches are and you only have 1% coverage, I think there's a problem. Then scientists challenge me and they say, do you have any scientific proof that statistically this 1% is not enough? No, sorry, I don't. It's just my common sense, which can be wrong, of course. But there's a question there. But then there's other uncertainties, like, for example, natural mortality. In fish stock assessment models, natural mortality is very important because you have to assess of all the different ages every year how much fish will die. So part of them will die due to fisheries, and this is something you can more or less measure with an error, which is, I guess, too large. But you also have to estimate how many fish die a natural death. And for small fish, this can be very high. Usually, this number is kept constant every year because it's very difficult to measure in the sea how much fish die a natural death. That's a very difficult thing to do. So they try to estimate this based on a number of parameters, and because we don't have the information, it is kept constant over the years. Now, in a stable ecosystem with stable climate, stable weather, I think this is not really a problem. So I think for many decades, this was not a problem before climate change started to kick in. Now we see with climate change that things are happening. For example, we didn't used to have squid in the North Sea, and we had pelagic fish stocks, herring, mackerel. Now, the last 3, 4, 5 years, we see massive amounts of squid coming into the North Sea. They eat things. If they are massive in numbers, well, fish they eat is massive as well. So they eat herrings, they eat all these kind of pelagic fish. But this is not taken into account in the stock assessment. The natural mortality is kept constant, but the natural mortality due to the squid is changing dramatically. And we see this with other fish stocks as well. We see the octopus coming in the Western English Channel. We see the cuttlefish coming massively in the Eastern English Channel. They eat stuff. And all this is not taken into account. So natural mortality is one of the main problems in stock assessment. And this is getting worse due to climate change. There's quite a number of issues with information in the Common Fisheries Policy. Yeah. Well, other things. You just stop me when I talk too much. Huh? But for example, the technical measures, mesh size regulation. In every fishery where valuable fish escape the gear, escape the net through the meshes, fishers will notice, and fishers don't like that. They just see the money swimming out of the net. If the mesh size, the legal mesh size, is too high, because then marketable fish escape, well, fishers will fiddle around with the mesh. They will do stuff so the fish cannot escape anymore. And this is something that you see going on throughout our region. I wouldn't say not in every fishery, but when market valuable fish escape, it happens. In the management system, people believe that the mesh size regulation is that fishers just follow it, but they don't. So again, there's a perception that control and enforcement works, but in reality it doesn't. So yeah, there's quite a lot of problems with information.
It's quite fascinating when you talk about the squid and likening it to the situation they've got in the southwest with the octopus. That's really interesting and shows that there's something going on. The only thing I was wanting to ask you as well, because you're mentioning about climate change quite a bit, Hans, when you say about since it kicked in, what sort of time scale would you give when that started becoming an issue?
That I think is already an issue. I think
Yeah. But since when would you go back?
Well, I think I do this job since the 1990s, and I have seen in the southern North Sea, which is probably temperature change is quicker in shallow areas, and the southern North Sea is a shallow area. So I think we have seen the climate change consequences quite early. So halfway the 1990s, I saw the first signals when I went at sea. Because we do these experiments every year.
Well, yeah, the reason I asked that is because I remember there were boats fishing out of our area, and what we call the deep water species, they were well into the Atlantic, into deeper water, catching things like black halibut, blueling, species like that. And there were scientists going out with them. Now, I'm going back into the 80s and just maybe into the 90s. And there were a wild swing in the temperatures in the deep water, as much as 6 degrees, which in percentage terms was massive. And they were recording that many years ago.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah. There's probably a lot of things we actually don't know or do not take into account.
Yeah. And how are you dealing with fisheries in Belgium?
In what way?
Just there's things you're talking about with.
Yeah, well, we struggle. We really struggle. Well, first of all, we started up this cooperation, and I think all levels, from the ministry, the administration, scientists, the industry, and also the NGOs, we are on the same line. We all think fisheries should be sustainable, fish stocks should be within the safe range, ecosystems should be healthy, but on the other hand, we all also believe that we should have a fishery that is profitable and that can focus on efficient fishing. I had in the past been criticized by saying that fisheries should be efficient. But I think if you fish efficiently, then you use fewer resources, also less fuel to catch the same amount of fish. So fishing should be efficient. We all believe that. We all are behind that idea. So there's unity in Belgium to deal with fisheries. And we all think that we are facing problems that are caused by the system. So we all also think that we should change the system, and we are working on that. We are continuously trying to think about alternatives. This is why fishers are giving us all their confidential data, because they say here are the good data, do something with it so we can get rid of this system today that doesn't work and move to something that actually does work, and do that in cooperation. So I think this is how we are dealing with fisheries in Belgium. We have problems, but we are actually trying to think outside the box to find a solution. The thing is, we have to convince other parties because we are tiny. Belgium is a tiny country. We have 65 kilometers of coast. Compare that to the thousands of kilometers, I guess, in the UK. We are insignificant. But I do think that these small Belgians have some good ideas worth spreading. So we are looking for support. We are looking for other parties to actually help us question the present system and also work on an alternative. We have some ideas, but it's not worked out in detail. We cannot do it by ourselves as well. So we are trying to cope with our own problems, but also trying to set up cooperation from the countries around us.
And can you see a better system could arise from it?
Well, we started this idea, I think, a number of years ago, thinking, but acknowledging there's an issue and trying to find solutions. And I think we have a pretty good idea of what could work. And well, the first thing is the data collection. I think it all starts with observing what are the consequences of fishing on the fish stocks and on the ecosystems. In order to do that, you need good information, you need good data. So, and the fishers agree with that, we want to put cameras on board for a full catch analysis. So, many fishermen are opposed to the idea to have cameras on board. I don't need cameras to see what fishers are doing. I just want to know the catch. That's all. So in Belgium, we put a camera above the conveyor belt, and all the fish that passes are recorded. It's a technology in development, so it doesn't work fully yet. But the idea is that if we do that, we can calculate the mortality caused by each individual fishing vessel. What is the impact of that vessel during that year on the fish stocks? Now, if you know that, and you can still, of course, you still need quota, and you can, if necessary, limit fishing vessels with simple management measures, like, for example, days at sea. This is the whole management system. You have the observation, you have the quota to limit, and you have the days at sea to get involved or to steer the fisheries in the right direction. If you have that, you don't need anything else. And the nice thing about that is you don't need technical measures. You don't need mesh size. You don't need to impose square mesh panels because fishers will use them themselves and will design them according to their own needs and their own situation. You don't need administration. You don't need all these inspections at sea. So imagine the simplicity and the reduction in costs if you move towards that system. Then all the complaints about administrative burden, complexity of regulations, controls, and so on, all these things just disappear. And you get a situation where you can actually have trust between all these parties and real cooperation. So the data are given without control and enforcement. Fishers say, okay, here are my data. You can know everything I can. But for the rest, let me do my thing. I want to focus on fishing. I want to follow the fish through the seasons and go fish them where they are. With the fishing gear, I think is most suitable to do that. And if I want to fish during the daytime with this fishing gear and during the nighttime with another fishing gear, which is not allowed today, just let them do that. Give them all the freedom to conduct their fishery, but be fully open in your catches. So this is, let's say, in a nutshell, what we want to do.
That sounds very impressive. And do you think it's realistic?
I think it's very realistic because we are actually already doing it. I mean, the foundation, collecting the data. We are more or less ready, except for the camera, the analysis of the video footage. There's still work there, but already most of the species we recognize. We can measure the length. We even can get extra information on the condition of the fish, and so the technology is there. We can do it. The main thing now is that the management system has to change
Yeah.
to give the fisher the freedom. Because what is the incentive of the fisher to give all his data? Because this is the first criticism we get. Fishers will never give all their data. No, but why don't they give their data? Because you have a very restrictive control and enforcement regime. But if you change that system, where you say we don't need that. We don't need all these regulations. We only need the data. Then the incentive of the fisher is the freedom of fishing, free choice of gear, free choice of operation, within, of course, the bigger boundaries of sustainability. There are habitats you have to protect from fishing. There are areas that are vulnerable. There are species that are vulnerable. So you need this kind of frame of basic protection. But within that frame, for me, it's full freedom.
It's interesting what you say there, Hans, because it reminds me of something that Jack Robertson said when they were talking in discussions about size of mesh on the square panels and things. And one of his colleagues was saying to them, well, or from up above, it was frowned upon because it was, what if the fishers cheat and do something different? So there was no trust.
Yeah. And that's the problem. When you work in a system based on control and enforcement, well, you can enforce, or you can regulate and say, well, in this kind of Scottish cod fishery, you have to use this square mesh panel to allow haddock and whiting to escape. And that panel has to be 50 meshes on 20 meshes of that mesh size in that material and that twine thickness. And you have to put it so many meshes from the cod end. I mean, this is how these things get regulated. It's very prescriptive. Now, the problem is that for the fishing vessel where the experiments went on, this will probably work. But if you go on another vessel in another season with a slightly different gear design, you will probably have to put your square mesh paddle a little more in front or a little more in the back, or make it bigger or smaller. I mean, fishers have to adapt these things to their own situation. But if your regulation says this is how it has to be, but in many cases it just won't work. So you have to give the fisher the freedom and judge the fisher on the outcome, on his catch. If you have a fisher using a square mesh panel and you have huge amount of haddock and whiting bycatch that you have to discard, well, it's probably because the square mesh panel is not in the right position. So you look at the catch and you let the fisher adjust his fishing gear so that the whiting and the haddock can escape, not the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. And is there, in the EU, is there days at sea? I know I'm sure there's a quota system. Is there days at sea?
Yes. In the EU, we have every single possible way of regulating. I mean, yeah, we have days at sea, we have area restrictions, we have real-time closures, we have technical measures of all kinds, we have quota, we have a landing obligation, we have all these things all together.
Yeah, crazy. Now, you might relate to this from what you're saying there, Hans. A conversation I had with a friend of mine who was landing near one of our local ports, Grabster. He's skipper and owner of the boat, and he was on the pier with me. He had a letter in his hand, and he says, Jim, he says, this is a letter with all my variations, what I have to do and adhere to, and policymakers from civil servants. And his comment to me, Hans, was, Jim, he says, I can see the person that wrote this letter has never been on a fishing boat in his life.
And that's the problem. Eh? I mean, I have a lot of respect for the people in the European Commission. I mean, I've been working together with these people for 35 years. They are hardworking people. They want to do the right thing, no discussion about it. But they miss that feeling of the reality. And this is so necessary. This is why stakeholder involvement, and this is one of the big buzzwords of the last 10, 15 years, stakeholder involvement. And the European Commission has really tried to organize that stakeholder involvement. But what do you see? That is most often meetings between managers, scientists, and the representatives of the fishing industry, which are also people who are doing a good job. But most of them don't go at sea anymore, or just know their own special situation when they were fishers themselves. And the stakeholder involvement is quite superficial. I think we need much more cooperation with the actual fishers, the people who go at sea. And I think you cannot do that all at the level we are doing that now. I mean, the level meetings in Brussels. Now you have to go local. You have to have this, let's say, more dispersed stakeholder involvement spread over the area, where the local people can actually talk about their own specific situation. And you need a management system that's very flexible to be adjustable to local situations. And then, because this is all very difficult to control and enforce, you get rid of control and enforcement, and you change that system that is so it is based on cooperation and openness and trust. So it's a real complete shift in how we address fisheries.
Yeah. Another comment that has been widely used here, when a word you mentioned just a last sentence about stakeholders, and it's a term used here. There's a vast difference between stakeholders and opinion holders.
And what's the last word you use?
There's a massive difference between stakeholders and opinion holders.
Yeah, opinion holders. Yeah, I didn't understand the word yet, but okay, sorry. I get it now. Yeah. Yeah, there is indeed a big difference. Yeah. And it's, of course, it's not easy to organize this, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah. And how, there's a big question now, how can we get, or obviously how can you get rid of the administration burden under the complex regulations?
Yeah, well, by changing the system towards what they call an output control. So you look at the output of the system, and the output is the catch. So you look at the catch of all the fishing vessels. You have to be able to record what's in the catch. You can do that, for example, with a camera on board. And once you have this, as I explained before, you have the system of catch analysis, you have the quota, simple regulations, days at sea, and all the rest of the administration can go. And the thing is that the data collection that we are that we have developed, which is this automatic link with the fishing vessel. So all the instruments on board that are interesting produce data, and this data goes straight through the cloud to our database. So once you have that system, it's fully automated. So one advantage is that there's no humans involved, so no errors, no fraud, or less fraud, because there's always possibility for fraud. But especially there's no administration necessary. So the skipper doesn't even have to fill out a logbook. It's all automatic. So the fisher can actually concentrate on his fishing. So if you go to that system, all administration and all complexity of regulations are, how you called it, redundant or not needed, just not needed.
It's forward thinking. And would you say where you would be looking at reaching the stage where observe everything and regulate less?
Yeah, that's the thing. And regulate, yeah, less is an understatement.
How could an alternative management or governance system look like?
But I think, first of all, you have the central managers in the EU. I'm talking about the EU. So, of course, they have to have some handle over what's going on at sea. So I think in the European Parliament, they have to set the boundaries. What do we mean with sustainability? What do we mean with healthy ecosystem and intact habitats? And they have to define how that should look like. This is something that society has to decide upon. How much damage do we accept for fisheries to do? So that's done at the higher political level. That's there. Then the European Commission should not deal with micromanagement. I mean, they should follow up how the whole ecosystem and fish stocks are evolving through time. And they have to check with what the politicians in the European Parliament have decided. They have to see, based on reliable information, how the fish stocks are evolving, and is this actually what we have decided as a society, how it should be. If that's correct, well, just let them do. So you, as the European Commission, has to measure the outcome, has to measure the status of the fish stocks and the status of the ecosystem. If that's fine, just let them go. If the Commission sees that something's going wrong, that there's in some area overfishing or some fish stocks in problem or too much damage to the ecosystem, well, they have to be able to, let's say, bring some changes and bring back the fishery within the boundaries of sustainability. But they have to do that with means that are easy to implement.
Yeah.
For example, today we have a lot of regulations which are almost impossible to control. For example, the landing obligation, forget it. There's no compliance for the moment, not possible to control. So if you can't control it, don't do it. Don't make yourself ridiculous. I'm sorry. Do it with days at sea, for example. So if the Commission sees that fishing fleets are not behaving, well, reduce their days at sea. Very simple. Every vessel that goes out and in a fishing harbor is recorded. So it's the most easy way to control a fishery and very efficient. So, of course, the European Commission has to have some means to control that. And that's the way they can do that. Once you have that, you don't need technical measures, you don't need inspections at sea, you don't need minimum landing sizes, you don't need a landing obligation, and so on. Then, finally, fishers can concentrate on what they are good at, and that's fishing, finding the higher fish concentrations, and much more than in the past, avoid what you don't want. Avoid the small fish and avoid the protected species. And of course, record their catches. That's the foundation of the whole thing. And then the scientists will finally get good data, and they will develop apps based on that good information to help the fishers. If you have all these catches of all these vessels in real time, you can you can build algorithms and models who give you distribution maps, which are updated every day with the real-time catch information you get from the whole fleet. So with these distribution maps, the fishers can actually plan their fishery in a much better way than they used to. They have this information on where is the fish I want and where is the fish I don't want and where are the habitats that are vulnerable. If you have this information, you have what you need for sustainable fishing. So the scientists will then also, based on this good data, produce metadata, let's say more general information on the state of the fish stocks and the state of the ecosystem that they can report to the European Commission. So the European Commission will get a true estimation of the status of the ecosystem and the fish stocks. And with that much more correct information, they will be able to manage much better. And then there finally will be a good relationship with the scientists and the fishers, and this will become a cooperation that is very valuable. So that I think that's in a nutshell the system how we think it can work. Of course, should you believe me? Well, not you should not believe me. And do I believe myself? Well, I do have doubts. I'm not sure if all this will work. I'm not sure actually how all this should work. I mean, in terms of models and algorithms and so these are complex things. But we are quite confident that we have reached in Belgium now a level that is much better than we see in our neighboring countries, a level of data collection and cooperation. So we do believe that this way forward has a lot of potential. Now, the thing is, before I can convince you, I will have to show you. Now, before I can show you, I should be able to do an experiment. So that experiment could be, for example, take the North Sea, and let's say, okay, for that North Sea, we will put the Common Fisheries Policy completely aside and replace it with something completely new. And let that, for the next decade, be an experiment in the North Sea. So I can demonstrate you that it works or it fails. And you can say, well, and that's the criticism I get. Well, if it fails, it's a drama, no? It's a real drama. Well, I would say the system today, as it is working, is failing. It is failing. If you look at all the problems we have in fisheries, and if you look at how desperate many fishers are, I mean, the fishing industry, fishers who during the last centuries have overcome so many crises. These are very dynamic people and very resilient people who are today saying, well, if I get the opportunity, I get out of the business. It's all too much for me. I just can't fish anymore. So let me do the experiment, because what we see today is not pretty.
You know, Hans, when you came to the point where you says, okay, will it work? I don't know. You know, you were saying that, yeah, that you don't know, but what came to my mind when you said that is an old saying that's used here a lot. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Mm-hmm. True. And I think
it's a will to drive it. What would be?
If you have a group of people who really see what's going on today and say we need to go to a better system, and you see the potential of the data we have, and you see the potential of the cooperation, well, I think if you have people who believe in it, I think we can reach it. I mean, let me give an example. It's a very different world, but the war in Ukraine. I mean, 4 years ago, everybody thought that's the end of Ukraine, and this has been so for a few years. Now, the last 6 months, you see that this drone technology has developed so much that Ukraine is actually on the winning hand. Nobody would have believed it. Nobody would have given the Ukrainians a chance a few years ago. But the Ukrainians were forced and pushed just for their sheer survival to come up with alternative ways of waging war. And they developed the technology so far that this underdog is now on top. I mean, as you say, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think it's the same here. I think if you look at the basics in our new approach, and you look at the value in that, I mean, good data, cooperation, trust, and so, well, you have these things which are lacking today. If you have these things, I think there's a very good chance that we can come to a much better system than we have today.
And could you almost see a fisher's role change, and every vessel becomes a scientific observation platform?
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's an automatic system. That's a good thing. You can collect the information from the fisheries catch, which is valuable for the fisheries, but which is also valuable for other parties who are dealing with the marine ecosystem, who are dealing with climate change, who are dealing with weather. There's a lot of information that you can collect on a fishing vessel that is valuable for many parties. For example, you can put a temperature sensor on a trawl, which means that every hole, the temperature sensor goes from the top to the bottom. So you get this temperature profile, which seems to be very interesting for climate scientists and weather scientists. If you do that on board of, if you do that in a fishing fleet, you have all these different units fishing in all these different places, and you get all these temperature profiles, which today you almost don't have. Just on a few fixed points you have them. So this is very valuable. We are also, for example, developing a eDNA sampler. So eDNA, I don't know if you know it, environmental DNA. Every fish that swims in the sea leaves behind a little bit of DNA. If you take a liter of, or a gallon of seawater, there's a lot of DNA in there. If you extract the DNA, you can determine the species that have been swimming around. So you, based on that DNA in the water, you get an impression of the numbers of fish species around, and also some indication on the quantity of fish. So this eDNA sampler is already operational on board of one of our fishing vessels. Gives us new information that is today not available, but that we can just fit into that data collection system on board of the fishing vessel, again, in an automated way. So you can actually make of a fishing vessel a data collection platform that is valuable for many parties.
And what role would that play in fisheries management?
I think the main thing is that fisheries managers can get a much better perception of the reality with that. I think these are reliable data, high resolution data, high quality, and real time. Compared to what we have today is low resolution, low quality, and very slow. I mean, it takes months before logbook data get in our database. Now with the changes, so now for managers, I think it's mainly about reliable information on the state of the fish stocks and of the ecosystem.
Why is fisheries mortality the only metric that really matters?
Because what you need to know to manage fish stocks is how quickly they grow and how quickly they die, or how many die. Once you have the catches and you know what the fishing mortality is that is induced by the fishing fleet, you know what effect it will have on the fish stock. And by collecting this catch information of all these fishing vessels over a wide area, you also get a pretty good idea on natural mortality. So you get a very good information on fishing mortality by each individual fishing vessel. And by combining all this data, you get a pretty good idea on natural mortality. So this very critical factor in stock assessment, natural mortality or mortality in general, you will now finally have much more accurate information. And if you have that, you have enough to follow up the fish stocks, and you have enough to manage. Because if you will see how this changes through time. And if it goes in the wrong direction, well, as a manager, you can say, well, let's use this simple means, days at sea, to limit where it's necessary.
I have to say, Hans, that I admire and appreciate the passion you have for it, for this, what you mentioned, and this system you're talking about, and a belief that it can work. It comes out across loud and clear. I respect you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the appreciation. I have to say, I'm very happy I can bring my story here. I really hope that we can do something together. I mean, but you and me with this podcast, but I mean, the British and the Europeans. I think, well, the sea separates us, but I think we belong together. And I think when it comes to managing fisheries and anything that happens in the sea, it makes much more sense to do it together than to draw this imaginary line halfway in the North Sea. that
Yeah.
separates us.
But Hans, when you say that, I couldn't, you don't get me wrong, I'm not pulling you up on that. I'm going to give you the measure that I agree with you, because we've already had a chat about how you remember Jack Roberts, and obviously you've worked together, so there's no barriers there. I was talking to one of our really successful young fishermen, and there's not so many, unfortunately, around now, but he was fishing down in the southern North Sea, and he was talking about how well he got on with some of the Dutchmen and probably Belgians. He was in the southern North Sea, and he says he was getting on really well with them, and they were honest with their catch data and things like that. So can we not see what's going on here? Scientists talk together, fishers talk together. That's when it finishes. That's when it starts and ends.
That's true. Actually, I call it when I give a presentation, I call it social innovation. But this is just expensive words of people just talking to each other. There's so much value in talking to each other. Let me give you an example. NGOs, the green people, let's say, 20 years ago, it was impossible to have one of the fishers' representatives and people of the NGOs together at one table. But then 15 years ago, we started with this cooperation and we involved the NGOs. And in the beginning, it was a bit awkward when these people started talking, but very quickly they started exchanging information and talking about their problems from both sides. And after a very short time, the people of the NGOs and the fishers, they just get along very well. So we're all people.
Yeah, yeah. And you see, can stock assessment become real time?
I definitely think it can. And not only it can, but I think it should. I mean, as soon as you have cameras on board, and this technology is under development, but it's already quite far. When you have cameras on board and you have a data collection system that we, for the moment, have fully operational on most of our vessels, you have the foundation for a real-time stock assessment, because you will have every fishing haul. As soon as the catch is processed, the information goes to the database, goes into a model together with all the information of all the other fishing vessels, and you get a constant update of the fish distribution and fish densities and so. And that is the basis for real-time stock assessment and real-time management, because this is the goal. You need real-time management. When huge amounts of octopus enter the Western English Channel in certain places, well, it's interesting to know today that it's happening. I mean, the system today between the first data collection and the actual quota, the advice, is something like almost 2 years. Well, that's not quick enough now to see all these sudden changes. We have to go to real-time stock assessment.
Yeah.
Or a combination of the two. I mean, I'm not excluding the one. I think we probably need the two. I mean, we have to feed the old system with better data so it performs better, but we need quick ways to assess the system in order to have quick management measures.
And would you say we would get to the stage, do we still need research vessels under at-sea inspections becoming obsolete? Or would they become?
I think research vessels we will probably still need for the more fundamental research, but I would not use them for the, let's say, the operational research like surveys and so on. I think it's much more efficient to use the fishing fleet to do that. It will have its own challenges. I won't say it will just be very easy, because there's differences between vessels. And so a catch of one vessel means something different than a catch of another vessel. And then you have other fishing methods. A catch of anglers means something different than a catch of a pelagic trawl. So, I mean, there's challenges there as well. But I think there's much more value there. And I think we can overcome the challenges. So research vessels for that, probably obsolete. Inspections, I think the inspections can be much less. I mean, all the inspections on technical measures are not needed anymore. So mesh sizes, selective panels, and so you don't have to check it anymore because it's free choice for the fisher. What we'll probably need inspection is the functioning of the camera, but a lot of that can be done remote. And then what catch is actually in the hull of the vessel. And that is probably a thing that will need some kind of control. How that should look like, I think inspection should also undergo, let's say, a paradigm change, because now fishers and inspectors are standing against each other. No, I think we need social scientists or people with social experience from other sectors to have a look at that. But I think inspectors should probably be involved more in a cooperative way and in a way to collect information. I mean, the way we do it, we know where the bad guys are in our fishery. We know what's going on. We know what kind of fraud is going on. We know how people fiddle around with fishing gear. Why? Well, because we have this social interaction. We talk to each other. And there is social control within the fishing industry. Fishers know from each other who is doing the bad thing. And this information is shared. So I think an inspector should also be more involved in the fishery like that. And where social control becomes more important, and where the good guys who mean well for sustainable fishing work together amongst themselves and with the scientists and with the inspectors to actually push the bad guys to behave better, because it is in the interest of everybody for fishers who actually behave in a sustainable way. And the bad guys just ruin it for everybody. So, I mean, it's a very different way of dealing with each other.
Yeah, but it's putting more trust in each other.
Yeah, and so much more fun. I mean, if you get along, no? If an inspector goes on board of a fishing vessel and he has to be guided with policemen with machine guns, I don't know if this inspector has a fun job, no? But if an inspector can go on board in a very different atmosphere, well, maybe this job can become fun as well.
Can fishing fleets become the world's largest ecosystem monitoring network?
Definitely. I'm sure it can. Yeah. Because they are indeed active over the whole world. And you can fill them up with sensors, any sensor you want. And you can put it at the surface, and you can put it on the fishing gear so it reaches the sea floor. Yeah, and if fishers cooperate in that and also give a hand in maintaining the system, I mean, a fisher who has as his main commercial activity fishing, but has to work in this system of data collection and does not have to spend time anymore on all the administration and the complexity and so on, well, he can spare some of his time in making all these sensors work. So you don't need expensive maintenance. I mean, the fisher himself can play an important role in maintenance of cameras and maintenance of sensors that are put on fishing gear. So you get a cheap system with very cheap maintenance to actually observe the marine ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. And who actually owns fisheries data?
Well, in our system today, it's the fisher who owns the data. So we have no rights regarding the data. Of course, if you want to enter the system that we are suggesting, the basis of the system is good data. So if you voluntarily join the system, you will voluntarily provide me with your data. If you don't want to do that, fine for me. But then you will be part of the Common Fisheries Policy as it is today, with all the control and enforcements that comes with it. But you have the choice. We will never force any fisher to join our system, but we have seen that the majority has done it voluntarily.
Okay. Yeah. And what are the risks of an observation-based management system?
The risks. I think we will probably find out the risks when we are trying it out. But I think the risks is, well, the questions I have is, will we find ways and models who are actually clever enough and quick enough to process all the information we will be getting? That's one thing. Another risk is, well, compliance. Will fishers maybe find ways around our camera system to avoid the quota they are facing? I think these are the two main things for me, main risks. Yeah.
When I say this, but it's just my own thoughts myself, and I don't want to put you in a position, Hans, but one of the problems around about what we've been discussing, and it comes from, it's a point a friend of mine, an Irish man, made to me just recently, where he felt that there was a real issue on the mackerel quota in Ireland. And he says that the problem where they feel the difficult position they feel they're in, he says, it's not Brussels. Brussels is not the problem. It's not coming from Brussels. He said, the problem is Dutch millionaires.
Yeah. Well, now you're talking about the pelagic fleet, of course. Huh? And
But the system is just shocking, I feel anyway. And I'm not hard left in any way. I'm not at all. I'm been conservative all my life. But you don't feel the country should own the quota and is allocated accordingly.
So you are saying that it's the country who should own the quota? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, rather than, because another thing that a scientist, fisheries scientist from Aberdeen Marine Lab once quoted, he says the biggest mistake they ever made here was putting a value on quota and license, because he says now the chances of a young guy leaving school, his ambition is to be a fisherman, going on to be a skipper, and eventually having his own boat. He says that's impossible to do now.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yes, I think I agree. I think I have been pro something in between, because we now have that system where the Belgian state owns the quota still, and is also strongly involved in dividing the quota amongst the different companies. I think the advantage of that is that indeed you can give the opportunity to young fishers to start. You can actually steer your fishery a little bit so that it's done in a social way. The disadvantage is that with the complexity of mixed fisheries and all these different quota and the choke species issue, and so you need a system where you can easily and quickly distribute quota to where they are needed. So you need some kind of exchange or rental system, but you can perfectly do that while the quota are still in the hands of the state. Every year, Belgium could distribute a quota, but still have some hand on how it is done.
Well, my response to that, Hans, is well done, Belgium.
Thank you.
I seriously mean that. How much uncertainty is acceptable in a real-time management system?
Well, I think we can allow ourselves quite some uncertainty because, well, we know that the cameras will increase the information hugely. So we will make a big step forward if we start using these cameras to analyze the full catch. So it will be much better than today. But to have a perfect catch registration of all holes is just not possible. So we will have to accept some sort of error and uncertainty. But then I think the information that we will have will be probably more than enough than needed to actually know where the fish is and how they evolve through time.
But I just, in my own head, which I don't think I'm missing anything, but from what you said about from what you're proposing, the cameras, fishers don't like cameras. But the big but for me, Hans, listening to you, is there's so many other changes that it'll just be part of a whole package and it will be acceptable.
I think the reason fishers don't like cameras is because you have a complex set of rules that are difficult to comply with.
Yes.
Now, if it's difficult to comply with, well, quite often you will have a situation that you don't comply. And if then each time a camera will register or what's the word, where a camera will actually show to the manager that you did not comply with the rules, well, a fine is the next thing that will come. Or your vessel will be put on the chain on the quayside. It will stop fishing. So the fishers are scared to just provide the managers with their true information on their catches. But when you change the system and it's not so much based anymore on control and enforcement, that changes the whole attitude of fishers because they don't have to be afraid to be put out of business if they just don't follow the rules for a few times. No, it's a much more flexible system.
Yeah. And can fisheries scientists realistically process millions of observations per day?
Well, I think they can, but the amount of information will not be so huge because we are not transferring to the cloud the images. So what we will do for each hole, we will analyze the catch, and for each of the species, we will have a length distribution. So for each fish, this means maybe, 30 numbers times, 20 species is 600 numbers for a hole. I mean, that's tiny. So for each hole, we get a tiny amount of information. Okay, if I have to do that for a few thousand vessels, still, compared to the huge amount of data we are able to process these days, well, this information coming from the fishing fleet will still be tiny. I mean, I think the information, the amount of data you use if you use Facebook for an hour is probably much more than the amount of data that you would produce with a fishing fleet in the North Sea. So no, it's just length distributions. It's just numbers.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's excellent. And where can our listeners follow you online? Hans, are you active on social media?
I'm trying to be. I'm 61 years old now. I'm not so active on social media, but the last 6 months I have been more active on LinkedIn, mainly to spread my message. So I forced myself to be present, and I have to say I kind of like it. It's nice. You get to know people with different ideas or the same ideas, and it gives discussions, and discussions bring wisdom. Because I don't claim to hold the wisdom and the truth in myself. I know I make errors, and if people discuss with me, and they will point me at weaknesses in my story, and that's for me very interesting, because then I will improve my ideas. So no, I'm very happy to be there for the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just maybe point that you told the wrong person that. You refer to being 61 to somebody who's going to say to you, "Oh, is that all? You're that young."
But I still have a few black hairs in my mustache. You're probably all white. No?
Very much so. It's a long time. I would like to thank you. Another point I was going to make as we include Hans was, as I mentioned earlier, and I do mean it, well done, Belgium. But I have to be upfront. That only goes to the point we fishers. I'll still want Scotland to beat Belgium when we're playing football.
Well, we had better times, eh? I mean, we had 2 draws during the 3 last matches, and only the last one we won. And so, yeah, we're going through, but we were a bit nervous, you know. We had better times.
well, you're still there, so you're doing better than us.
That's true. That's true. Well, next time better.
Yeah.
I wish the Scots all the luck.
Yeah. We emptied Boston as far as alcohol is concerned.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Hans. I really appreciate your time, and credit to what you're looking at doing, and all the very best with it. I really do hope you have success. It sounds fantastic. Forward thinking, and definitely the way to go.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, and my greetings to the Scotch fishers and all Scotsmen and women.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Same to the Belgians.